with the father, he will probably carry a higher degree of masculine confidence into his early peer interactions with other boys. Now, do fathers and sons ever bond perfectly? Well, of course not. Any of you who are parents know that. In fact, any of you who have any kind of human relationship with anyone know we don't ever get it completely right. I have 2 sons. And I know already that if I were to get a report card from my boys, it would be mixed. I really think I'd get a few A's. I know I would get some C's, D's, maybe even a couple of F's too. Nobody does it perfectly. But in essence, what Dr. Nicolosi has found is that among his male homosexual clients, there were not only the imperfections that you expect in any father-son relationship, or any relationship for that matter, he also found that in many cases the boy felt the father was either absent emotionally, or emotionally rejecting, or distant, or inaccessible, or sometimes outright hostile. Does that mean the father is to blame if the son is homosexual? Of course not. Because the fact that a boy may have felt something about his father does not mean that what he felt was accurate. You know this already, I'm sure. It isn't so much what actually happens between us that causes our emotional responses to each other. It's how we perceive what is happening between us. I know personally over the years I have worked with homosexual men who had fathers who were cruel, rejecting, humiliating. And I have worked with homosexual men who had fathers who were loving and available and healthy. So what happens between father and son is not necessarily the fault of the father. If anything is to blame, it is our imperfect ability to read each other's needs and to interpret the way we are responding to each other. Now, if there has been a dissatisfaction in the boy's ability, or a limitation in the boy's ability to bond with his father, in many cases, he will find the mother to be a safer figure. And so the mother-son bonding, which is a secondary family influence to the boy, may in fact become a place of safety to him. So in many cases, adult male homosexuals will say, for whatever reason, I never felt as safe with dad as I did with mom, and thereby I identified more with mom than with dad, and thereby identified more with the feminine than with the masculine, which will lead, of course, to gender identity, largely influenced by family dynamics. We all have a gender assignment, male or female. There is a gender role that comes with that, the role our culture expects us to play as male or females. We all have gender identity, that is, our sense of ourselves as masculine or feminine, our sense of confidence in our ability to fulfill the role of male or female that our culture has assigned us. And to whatever extent we experience either confidence or a lack of confidence in gender identity, that in turn influences early peer bonding. Now, this, I think, is critical. All of you remember, as boys and girls, a time when boys and girls tended to cluster with their own gender. In our elementary school years, frequently the boys have their own clubhouses with the signs that say, "Girls stay out." And the girls cluster together and say, "Boys have cooties." And what's happening there is very important. We are solidifying our identity as male or female through solid bonding with our peers. And that is natural and right, so that by the time puberty kicks in and the erotic responses are becoming more pronounced, hopefully through our identification with our own gender, we've solidified our own gender identity. Now we're ready to take on the mystery of the other, the contrasting heterosexual relationship. But what if the boy has not felt adequately bonded with his own? What if he approached the playground not feeling well bonded to his father, and thereby not feeling well bonded to males, and thereby not confident with males? Well, what's one of the greatest sins you can commit at that age? The sin of being different. The sin of not being as confident. The sin of not fitting in. Because what do the other kids do with such a boy? Do they surround him and say, "Oh my goodness, you seem to be suffering from same-sex gender identity difficulties. What can we all do to affirm you?" Yeah, right. Little monsters, peck him to death. Which only increases the sense of, aha, I really am different. And in many cases, that sense of differentness will keep a boy from bonding well with other boys. Frequently, pre-homosexual boys will prefer bonding with girls, but in my opinion, they will retain a very deep longing for male bonding that they think is inaccessible to them. If, by the time adolescence kicks in, that particular need for same-sex bonding has not been satisfied, Dr. Nicolosi and other developmental theorists have proposed that the homosexual orientation then develops because there is a deep need or longing for same-sex bonding that has now taken on a sexual component. It has been what we would call sexualized, which happens when a legitimate emotional need has now become a sexual desire as well. Almost as though the wires, the erotic and the emotional, got crossed, and an emotional need has now become a sexual desire as well. By that definition, then, homosexuality would represent a sexualization of emotional needs, creating the homosexual orientation. And in a nutshell, that's how many developmental theorists define homosexuality: a legitimate emotional need for same-sex bonding that has taken on a sexual component. Now, the upside of these theories is that they do take into account the role that environment and early bonding plays on our development, both emotionally and sexually. The upside, I would have to say also, is that I've seen this particular pattern to be true in the background of too many of the men I've worked with to ignore. The downside is it does not necessarily apply to every homosexual male. It certainly applies to too many for us to dismiss it altogether. One thing is certain, though: whether the causes are inborn, whether they are familial, whether they involve personal choice, at some critical point, the boy who realizes, or the young man who realizes he is attracted to the same sex, is going to have to do something with that discovery. Initially, he may keep it a secret. In many cases, it is a tormenting secret. If you have ever felt you had to keep something about yourself secret, because if it were known, you would be rejected by or demeaned by the people who mean the most to you, then you can get at least a glimpse of what many homosexual men have gone through. In many cases, those of you who have homosexual loved ones have a loved one who perhaps for years kept this a secret from you, agonizing over how you would respond, praying that it would go away, trying to somehow make it convert into heterosexuality, and deathly afraid that if that secret were known, your relationship would be permanently damaged, and they did not want to lose you. It's a terrible position to be in. At times, though, that developing boy or young man will decide to start experimenting